Hello, Bobcats. This is Mrs. Wilhite, 5th grade math. We're still in Chapter 3. We're going to be working on Chapter 3, Lesson 3. And it has to do with two-digit dividends. It is a 5th grade standard, something you're required to learn in this grade. And I'm hoping that at the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to divide. You'll divide with and without remainders. So why am I learning this, Mrs. Wilhite? What's the main idea? What's the purpose? Well, you already know it is a 5th grade standard, so you're required to learn it to be ready for the grades that are coming your way. But also, you will do division in life. You'll be dividing things into different groups. And an example would be your savings. If you're saving to purchase something, you might figure out how much you're going to have to save each month, dividing it into those equal months. Also payments, if you're paying off a vehicle, a car, if you're buying a large item, a television, and you make payments every month, you got to figure out how much do I need to pay in each of those months. Also cooking, if you're dividing things into equal groups when you're cooking, the lesson today will help you a lot when you're looking at putting things into equal groups. All right, before we get into the lesson, what do you already know about division? So I'm looking for vocabulary here. The answer to a division problem is a quotient. So the answer 4 would be the quotient in this division problem. Another vocabulary term is the number of groups. The number of groups is the divisor. So when you see divisor, you know that's how many groups you're going to be putting another value into. And then finally, the number that you're putting into groups, the number that's being divided into equal groups is called the dividend. And knowing these vocabulary terms will help you. So again, from my experience, I know there's vocabulary that's important with division. The quotient is the answer to a division problem. The divisor is how many groups, so I need 6 groups. And finally, I also know that the dividend is the number of groups, is the number I'm putting into groups. So I'm putting 24 into 6 equal groups. The quotient is 4, the divisor is 6, and the dividend is 24. Some steps that will help you with division is divide is step 1. The first thing we got to do is figure out is division. After we divide, we can multiply. Okay, and after we multiply, we can subtract. Finally, bring down. And when you do get an answer, we always want to check to make sure if it's reasonable, see if it even makes sense. Something that I've told students in the past is you can think of it as dad, mom, sister, brother. Again, when you divide, you can think dad, mom, sister, brother. And the dad stands for divide, step 1. Mom's multiply, step 2. Subtract is sister. And then brother is bring down. That little acronym I think will help you remember the steps in order. So dad, mom, sister, brother. Divide, multiply, subtract, and finally bring down. Checking, of course, at the end, does it make sense? All right, moving right into example 1, math in my world. Eli donates his toys to 5 different charities. He has a total of 75 toys to donate. Eli donates the same number of toys to each charity. How many toys does each charity receive? Well, I know the number that I'll be putting into groups, the dividend, is 75. So I'm going to take 75 and I'm going to put that number into 5 equal groups. The divisor's 5. And I need to figure out what is the quotient. How many goes into each of those 5 groups? I'm going to write down my steps just to help me along the way. Dad, mom, sister, brother. Or divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. Step 1, divide. I need to see how many times will 5 divide into this 7, this first digit here, which is actually 70. But how many times will 5 divide into 7? Well, 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 2 is 10. So I can't use 2. I can't go over this 7. Okay, so divide, I think it goes 1 time. Step 2 is multiply. What is 5 times 1? Well, I know 5 times 1, that's 5. So divide and then multiply. 5 times 1 is 5. I can subtract the 5. Well, I know 7 minus 5 is 2. Okay, and then finally bring down. Bring down that 5, so I now actually have 25. I need to figure out how many times, I'm going back to step 1, will 5 divide into 25? Well, 5, 10, 15, 20, I know that 5 times 5 is 25. So if I multiply 5 times 5 is 25, I can go ahead and subtract. And if I subtract 25, I have 0 left over. There's no remainder here because there's nothing left over. So if I go back to the original question, it says, I'm going to underline that, how many toys does each charity receive? Well, I think the quotient, the answer is 15. Each charity will receive 15 toys. This is reasonable because I'm going to check my work. 15 times the 5 equal groups does give me the 75 toys. It makes sense that the quotient is 15. I have the right answer. Example 2, Math in My World. Caleb is putting he's putting his cards into an album. He has 57 cards that he can put into 4 cards on each page. How many full pages will Caleb have? Will there be any cards left over? Okay, well, I know that I'm 57 into 4 equal groups. So I need to figure out what is the quotient. Well, starting with step 1, which is divide. 4 divides into 5. 4 times 2 is 8. I can't use 2. It's bigger than 5, so I know it's 1. Divide. So dad, mom. Multiply is next. 4 times 1. Well, I know 4 times 1 is 4. So I can subtract the 4. 1's left over. Dad, mom, sister, and then bring down. That's 7. Go back to divide. How many times will 4 divide into 17? Well, 4 times 5 is 20. Too big. I can't go over 17. 4 times 4 is 16. That works. So divide. I say 4. Next is multiply. 4 times 4 is 16. I can go ahead and subtract that 16 because 4 times 4 is 16. 1 left over. There's nothing left to bring down, so I have a remainder of 1. The 1 will not fit into the 4 equal groups equally, and I don't want to deal with decimals or fractions quite yet. So it's a remainder or 1 left over. So let's go back to the original question. How many full pages will Caleb have? Well, the quotient is 14, or Caleb will have 14 full pages. And there's 1 remainder, or 1 card that will be left over. Is it reasonable? Well, if I do 14, the quotient, times the divisor, or how many groups there are, I get 56. Plus the 1 remainder, and I do get my dividend, or I do get 57 that he started with. It makes sense that I have the right answer. Okay, moving into guided practice. Okay, and I'm looking at 65 as my dividend. I'm going to put 65 into 5 equal groups, and I need to figure out what is the quotient. How much is in each of those 5 groups? So, of course, my steps: divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, or dad, mom, sister, brother. And I'm going to start with divide. How many times will 5 divide into 6? Well, 5 times 2 is 10. That's too big. It's 1. Multiply. 5 times 1, well, that's 5. So I can go ahead and subtract 5. And I get 1. Bring down the 5. Okay, now I have 15, and I can go back to divide, and I need to figure out how many times will 5 divide into 15. 5, 10, 15, so it's 3. After I divide, I can go ahead and multiply. 5 times 3 is 15. Go ahead and subtract 15 because 5 times 3 is 15. Nothing's left over. There's no remainder. So I figured out the quotient is 13. 13, and I know it's reasonable because if I took 13 times the 5 groups, I actually do get my dividend. I do get the number that I broke up. 65 is it. Guided practice number 2. So I have 45 as my dividend, which I'm putting into 3 equal groups, and I need to see what the quotient is, how much goes in each group. My steps are divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. Dad, mom, sister, brother. And I'm going to go ahead and start with divide. And I need to figure out how many times will 3 divide into 4. Well, 3 times 2 is 6. That's too big. It has to be a 1. The next step is multiply. What is 3 times 1? Well, I know 3 times 1 is 3. I can go ahead and subtract 3. I have 1 left over. The next step is bring down. So I can go ahead and bring down that 5. And I get 15. Now I go back and start over with those steps. And this time I'm going to divide. And I'm going to divide 3 into 15. And I know that 3 times 5 is 15. What's after divide? Multiply. 3 times 5 is 15. So I can go ahead and subtract 15. And there's nothing left to bring down. So I figured out the quotient. 45 divided by 3 or put into 3 equal groups will give me 15 in each group. I determined the answer, the quotient, is 15. I know it's reasonable because 15 times 3 is 45. Independent practice. We're now going to be dividing 42 into 3 equal groups. So the dividend's 42. The divisor's 3, and I need to figure out the quotient. How much goes in each of those 3 groups? My steps, dad, mom, sister, brother, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and I'm going to start with divide. How many times will 3 divide into 4? Well, 3 times 2 is 6. I can't go over the 4. It won't work. It has to be a 1. So now that I finished division, I can do multiplication. What is 3 times 1? Well, I know 3 times 1 is 3, so I can subtract 3. And when I subtract 3, I'm going to have a leftover value of 1. After subtract, I can bring down. I'm going to bring down this 2. Okay, I'm going to go back to step 1, divide. And I'm going to divide 3 into 12. How many times will 3 divide into 12? Well, I know that's 4. The next step after divide is multiply. 3 times 4 is 12. So I can go ahead and move on to subtracting. 12 minus 12 is nothing. There's no remainder. There's nothing left over, nothing to bring down. The quotient is 14. I theorize the quotient is 14, and I know it's reasonable because 14 times the 3 groups gives me the dividend 42, or it tells me the correct number. So I can move on. Still in independent practice, still dividing. This time I have 68 put into 4 equal groups, so the divisor is 4. I need to figure out what is the quotient, how much goes in each of those 4 groups. Well, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. I'm going to start with divide, and I need to see how many times will 4 divide into 6. It has to be 1. 4 times 1 is 4. So I can go ahead and subtract the 4. And I have 2 left over. After I subtract on my steps, it says bring down. So I'm going to bring down that 8. Once I bring down the 8, then I've created the number 28. And I can go ahead and go back to divide. And I have to think, how many times will 4 divide into 28? Well, 4 times 7 is 28. So 4 times 7 is 28. I can go ahead and subtract 28. And there's nothing left over. And the final step, bring down, well, there's nothing left to bring down. So I have my quotient. 17. I surmise the answer to be 17 is the quotient. There's 17 in each of the 4 groups. And if I check it by multiplying 17 times 4, then I do get the number I put into groups. I do get my dividend. So I know that I have the right answer with 17. I'm still in independent practice, moving on to problem number 9. I need to figure out how many times 4 will divide into 60, or how much will be in each of those groups. I'm going to put my steps to help me. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. And I'm going to go ahead and start with divide. And I need to figure out how many times 4 divides into 6 without going over. Well, it's 1. 4 times 1, if I multiply, is 4. So I can subtract the 4. Well, 2's left over. After I subtract, if I look at my steps, I'm going to bring down. I need to bring down the 0. Okay, and I have actually created the number 20, so I'm going to go back and divide. 4 divides into 20 5 times, because I can't go over the 20. I can't pick something that's going to be bigger than 20. Okay, so after I divide, I can go ahead and multiply. 4 times 5 is 20. So the next step is subtract the 20 that I got from multiplying. Well, 20 minus 20 is nothing, 0. There's absolutely nothing to bring down, so I believe I have my quotient. The quotient is 15. And really, I can check the reasonableness. I know I have the right answer because 15 times 4 does give me 60. Problem number 10. I'm going to put 64 into 5 equal groups. And I'm going to use those steps. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. I'm going to start with divide. How many times will 5 divide into 6? Well, that's 1. And then I can move on to multiply. 5 times 1 is 5. So we can subtract the 5. 6 minus 5, there's 1 left. After I subtract, I can bring down the 4. Now I brought down the 4 and now I have 14. So once I've created that 14, I'm going to go back to step 1 and I'm going to have to divide. How many times will 5 divide into 14? I can't go over. Well, 5, 10, 15. 3 is too big. It can't be that. So it has to be maybe 2. And the next step after divide is multiply. Well, what is 5 times 2? That's 10. So I can go ahead and subtract 10. Well, there's 4 left over. There's nothing more to bring down, so I think I have the quotient. It's 12, remainder 4. Is it reasonable? Is my quotient making sense? Well, if I put 12 into each of the 5 groups, I have 60 plus the 4 left over, and look, I do get the dividend. I have the right answer. Still in independent practice, I'm on problem 13, and it's 44 is the dividend, 2 groups, 2 is the divisor, and what is the quotient? Well, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. I'm going to start with divide. How many times will 2 divide into 4? Well, that's 2. The next step is multiply. What is 2 times 2? Well, 4. So I can go ahead and subtract the 4. 4 minus 4 is nothing, and I can bring down. Going back to that first step, divide. How many times will 2 divide into the 4? Well, 2 times 2 is 4. So I multiplied, and I got 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. Next is subtract. I can subtract the 4. Well, 4 minus 4 is nothing, and I actually have no remainder. So I think the quotient is 22. And I can check my answer and see if it's reasonable by seeing 22 in the 2 groups does give me the 44, the dividend. I have the right answer. I'm now in problem solving, and it says Miranda practiced a total of 52 hours in 4 weeks to prepare for a piano recital. If she practiced the same number of hours each week, how many hours did she practice each week? So here's my question. How many did she practice each week? Well, I'm putting 52 total hours, the dividend, into 4 equal groups, the divisor. And I'm going to use my steps. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. And I'm going to start with divide. How many times 4 divides into 5? Well, that's 1. I can multiply. 4 times 1 is 4. And subtract. Okay, I have 1 left over. I can bring down the 2. And so now I'm dealing with 12, and I need to figure out how many times 4 divides into 12. I'm on divide. Well, 4 times 3 is 12. I can go ahead and subtract because I know 4 times 3 is 12. There's nothing left to bring down, so I believe I have my quotient. I understand the answer is Miranda practiced each week. She practiced 13 hours each week. I know it's reasonable because 13 times the 4 weeks does give me her total 52 hours. All right, Bobcats, it's that time. What did you learn today? Well, in summary, today I learned to divide. I learned that you have to use the dividend, the total number, put them into equal groups to get your quotient. I also learned you can check your answer. So again, hopefully when you're saving for something in the future or you're dividing payments up or you're cooking, you'll be able to divide so that you can go ahead and get the answer to whatever question you have. Thank you so much for your attention.